Good morning, it's Sunday, and we have some beautiful weather amidst 2 very rainy months here in San Francisco. So I'm going to take you all on a nice walk today, and we'll talk about what I think is one of the biggest difficulties that just about every language learner will encounter at some point, and how I'm planning to get over that with my Chinese studies.
1, 2, 3, funk it.
Okay, so we've just walked through the Castro, we're right on the edge now, and we're in this beautiful valley where basically every direction you look, you're just surrounded by a huge hill and a patchwork quilt of facades, different colored buildings, there's trees. It's just a really gorgeous place to walk, and the weather is phenomenal. And we now have a pretty steep little climb to get to the neighborhood where the coffee shop is, where I want to study today. But so now let's sort of frame this problem that I mentioned that I think just about every single language learner faces at some point. And unfortunately, I think this is the thing that stops people in their tracks. And in many cases, people never get through this. They never overcome this barrier. So let's say that you're in a coffee shop, right? And then perhaps you're studying your French and someone turns over and they say, "Oh, is that French? Are you learning French?" Or maybe you're at a dinner party and someone says, "Oh, Robin is actually learning French. He speaks French. You guys could talk together." And you turn and you're confronted with someone who speaks the language that you're learning. Now, at first, you're excited, right? Finally a chance to practice this language. And then they inevitably say something like, "Ah, tu parles français, c'est super. Bon, on peut pratiquer si tu veux, ce serait génial." Or, "Sugoi nihongo hanashimasu ka? Nande, nanka, doyotte nihongo narayamashita ka?" And then what was excitement sort of crumbles into being terrified, and you realize that you don't know what to say, and you sort of je parle un peu le français. That's the best you can do. In my case of Chinese, it's like 我不会说中文. Like I can't even get the sentence out, right? So this is the problem. You end up where you've learned quite a lot of this language, but you have this paralysis. You can't figure out how to speak. And I think that is one of the largest problems that people complain about. Is they tell me, "Look, I've studied French, I've studied German or Spanish or Japanese, it doesn't matter. And I swear I know a lot of words, but I just can't speak." So how are we going to overcome this? Because right now with Chinese, this is exactly where I am. So one thing I love about San Francisco that often reminds me of European cities like Barcelona is that, first of all, the hills, which is gorgeous. I mean, and just look at this. It's just so phenomenal. But oftentimes you run into like a dead end like this, and then you find this gorgeous steep set of stairs that we are now going to climb, and it's just so exciting. I just love it. I love this city. So I've only just walked up a few steps, and already I turn around and I just see the whole of San Francisco opening up right before all of us. So I just think this is a really nice walk to sort of tackle this topic. So what's happening with my Chinese is that I've been using Duolingo. And one of the nice things about apps like Duolingo is that it's so easy to just knock out one lesson, right? They're so short. The interface is very easy to use, and so what happens is you end up covering quite a lot of material very quickly, and I think it gives you a bit of a false sense of progress in the sense of your speaking abilities, right? Because you're thinking, "Oh, I'm learning all these words, right? It's like, this is going great." But what I find with that approach is that the retention is very low. And I always found this in the past with Duolingo as well. So what happens is you start learning all these new words and phrases, but the problem is you're not necessarily retaining them because there's no consolidation. And one thing I was very disappointed to realize is that Duolingo, at least with Chinese, they seem to have removed the feature where you can actually see a list of all the terms you've learned so far. So I was really excited about just going through that list and reviewing all the things I'd learned, and I realized it wasn't there. But what I found is that I got to a place where I learned all these new phrases, I learned how to ask what time it is and ask what day of the week it is and all kinds of stuff. And then somebody would ask me, you know, hey, what have you learned? And I found that I was like, 今天是星期新 like I couldn't grasp the words. They weren't there, and it just reminded me of that feeling that we all get where it's so frustrating because we know we've learned these words and phrases, but we're not able to put them into sentences yet. All right, we made it. So here we are, pretty much at the top. I just think it's such a gorgeous little view. Got a cherry blossom tree behind me. And so now I want to finish this video before going to the coffee shop just around the corner by explaining a philosophy that I have that helps me get over this issue every single time. And that's the philosophy of knowing how to do a lot with a little bit of language, right? So in my opinion, it's far more valuable to be able to, let's say, know just a few hundred words, but to be able to make lots and lots of sentences, but also practical sentences that are actually useful when you encounter a speaker of the language. In the case of Chinese, I learned a lot of stuff that was like, I don't know, what's a good example? 杯子在书后面 or 下面 or whatever. You know, the mug is on top of the book, next to the book, behind the book. The chair is next to the woman. Or I learned things like, you know, 我的妈妈在公园运动. Like my mother exercises in the park. Or so the point is that I learned all these words, I learned all these constructions that are really helpful, but the sentences themselves are not very useful, right? When I encounter someone and they say, oh, like, let's talk in Chinese, I'm not going to say 我的妈妈在公园运动, right? Like, it's not going to happen. But what you can do is once you have all those tools, right? You have the words, you have the constructions, the phrases, you can spend time consolidating. You can do consolidation to, first of all, really iron out all the kinks and make sure you actually know those words and phrases. But then you can actually practice. You can start building what are called islands. We can talk about that in the next episode if you want. But islands are a thing in language learning where you set up a few topics that you're familiar with, you're able to talk about, so that if you get in a conversation, that's your comfort zone, right? And then if the conversation starts to get away from those islands, you can kind of wade back and bring the speaker with you to your comfort area. So this is like the very beginning of that process of building some islands, right? So what I'm going to do now in my Chinese is that, like I said, I've got to a point with Duolingo where I've learned a bunch of words and phrases, but I'm not retaining them, and I'm also getting rusty on the work I did to consolidate my previous knowledge from Chinese pods. So basically this is consolidation phase 2, but I'm going to be consolidating, and I'm also going to be using a method that I call conversation building, which we can also talk about very soon. And that's where I try to sit with a native speaker if I can, or an advanced speaker, and I just try to ask lots of questions. I want to know how to say, I go to the park, you go to the park. Shall we go to the park? When shall we go to the park? Should we go to the park tomorrow? No, but let's go to the park tonight, right? Or do you want to go to the park? I don't want to go to the park, but I would like to eat. You know, where shall we eat? Let's eat here. All those phrases I just said are perfectly practical. They require very few actual words, and just by switching out the word park for coffee shop or cinema or restaurant and switching out the verb from go to perhaps watch a movie at the park, all of a sudden, with not very much vocabulary, we're able to start making lots and lots of phrases. And I think that's the point where you get to this stage where I feel like I can start saying, I speak French, I speak Chinese. That's when I can actually begin to feel like that's actually true. I think what lots of people do at this stage is they just keep going because it feels good, right? It feels good to just knock out another lesson, and Duolingo is telling you that you're on a 10-day streak, a 15-day streak, and you see now I'm on level 6. But I think it's dangerous because what happens is you end up learning so many words and so many phrases without being able to actually use them, that the task of consolidating them, it kind of becomes overwhelming. And I think you get this sort of paralysis where you try to speak in Japanese and there's just too many words to choose from, and you're not able to do it. So when you start to feel like you're getting out of your depth, like you're swimming in these words that you've learned but can't use, I think you should stop, breathe, and do some consolidation. And then depending on what stage you are, like for me right now with Chinese, I think that conversation building is great. And I actually used to do this even from a very early stage. I used to teach a small group Italian class. The first thing we learned was how to say you drink, I drink, you go, I go. We learned a few nouns. We learned like cinema, restaurant, and then we learned how to say you want, I want, and then a question. And in 1 or 2 short like group sessions, I had these students asking each other, like, do you want to go to the cinema? No, I don't want to go to the cinema, but I would like to eat something. Where should we eat? No, do you want to eat at the cafe? No, I don't want to eat at the cafe, but I want to eat at the restaurant. Great. You know, that was like one session. Next session, we learned things like what time. All of a sudden, you can say, what time should we eat at the restaurant? And all of a sudden, you're using all these words, but you're saying so many things, and they're all useful. Okay, so I know I just repeated the same thing like 3 times, but I just want to hammer home how much I believe in that philosophy. Learn to do a lot with a little bit of language. Now let's go and get some coffee.